Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. He said that fool, you weren't cool. He took a book to your school. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Don't get shocked if you get mocked. It's what you find when you use your mind. Don't you sweat it, look 'em in the eye. Don't regret it, hold your head high. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Try to show some tenderness, even when they're playing chess. You think it's dumb to be smart, but that's the way you make art. So be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Use your brain, that's a start. It's okay to be smart. Don't you think that you are cool? Sorry, dummy, the joke's on you.
Hi, I'm James Eade, and this is Change Your Mind. And I live in the divided states of America. And how do we become united again? And this is the question that I think we have to start to change the way we think. Not change your mind in the way of I changed the order for my lunch today, but change the way we think about other things. And stop trying to force people to change their way of thinking. Because unity does not mean uniformity. We do not all have to look the same, dress the same, think the same. We don't have to practice the same religions. We don't have to believe in other things other than the basic principles that were established when this country was established. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And don't interfere with the pursuit of happiness. But sometimes we try to change other people's minds, and we get frustrated. And we wonder, because we all live in glass houses, why are we throwing stones at each other? And our fingers and feet are bleeding and we don't know why? Well, yes, we do know why. It's because we're stuck in a pattern of thinking that we don't know how to change. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said that, Jim, I can change your mind through yoga. Through yoga? I said. And I had this question in my mind, if I can find it. Oh gosh, I don't know if I can find it. All right. Let's see. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to another thing. And okay. All right. What I'm going to do is bring on my guest now, Yudhishthira, who teaches yoga. And he's going to try to change my mind about yoga. Hi, Yudhishthira. Thank you for coming to be on Change Your Mind and offering to change my mind about yoga.
Well, thanks, Jim. Your introduction could not be a better introduction for yoga than it was. I mean, it's like perfect. So, do you have any starting questions, or you want me to just sort of start riffing?
No, yeah, we could do that, but I do have some questions because the question of yoga, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, why would I take up yoga? Well, there's going to be, I'm going to be as honest as possible. When I was growing up, I was thinking, well, there's going to be women stretching in Lululemon outfits and spandex and stuff like that, and that would be fun. And yeah, it's good to be stretching and good to have more mobility. I can see that, but Pilates is a good thing, and I don't do Pilates, so why would I do yoga? But there's a little more to it from what you were telling me offline. There's a little more to it, and I would like the audience to understand.
Well, it's there's a famous yogi. His name is Paramahansa Yogananda. He had a simple teaching, and he said that about yoga, about this existence, is that when we are practicing yoga, there is center everywhere, wherever we are. That's the center. And there's no circumference, no limitations to what we're capable of doing or being. But the view of yoga has changed within this country, within the West, what we call the Western society. It's changed a lot through the years. And if there was a time, Jim, I remember when I was, maybe in my 20s, driving across the U.S. at a time when AM radio was all you could get.
Yeah.
And I remember, and there were periods of time in which the only station I could get were Christian revivalists.
Right.
And I remember hearing this preacher, I don't remember his name or anything else about him, but he was railing on and on about the evils of yoga.
Oh, really?
And I wasn't, I didn't know a lot about yoga, but I just knew that he had it wrong. And of course, things have changed over the last 30, 40 years in this country and around the world about yoga. But most people still tend to think of yoga primarily as yoga postures, the stretching part of
Right.
it.
Sure.
Don't get me started on Lululemon. That's a whole other matter.
Okay.
Uh, but you know, there there is a lot of misunderstanding in the world about yoga, and it's not so much a misunderstanding. It's just that people have narrowed yoga down into a set of physical exercises.
Right.
And when I go to the gym and I look up at the screens and they have all the classes that are being offered, you have Pilates, you have spin, you have Zumba, you have dance classes, and occasionally you'll see a yoga class thrown in there as if yoga is one of those things. And here's the magic of yoga is that even when someone goes to a yoga class at a gym, taught by a teacher who only knows yoga as yoga postures, there is something beneath the surface that rises up into the person in the middle of a yoga posture or after the yoga class is done, where what they come away with is a sense of being more grounded, more steady, less stressed out, um,
Yes.
calmer, and so that even that little bit of practice of yoga, even when it's not taught by someone who has a broader understanding of yoga, nonetheless has a power to change people's realities.
That's amazing to me. Now, this is separate, or is it separate? Let me ask the question. When I go to work out and I have a good workout, and I feel kind of a good kind of tired afterwards, so I feel like I've had a good workout, and I feel like uh, calmer because I've kind of physically gotten the stress out of my body just by lifting weights or doing the treadmill or whatever it is that I'm doing. There's some sense of that, and I'm hearing you talk about that, but also I'm also hearing a little bit more than that. And can you tell me?
There is more than that because of the fact that yoga originally had very little to do with yoga postures.
Hmm.
In India, they have found images um, drawn from 5 to 10,000 years ago showing people in yoga postures. But those yoga postures at the time were relatively few, and all of them were postures in which people were meditating. So
Ah,
everyone has in their head this idea of, well, I can't do yoga because I can't go into full lotus position.
right.
Well,
That
my body
I
doesn't do
confess
that
that.
either.
Yeah, I confess that that was a barrier for me, is because I'm not very flexible, and I have some sports related injuries that I don't feel like I can get into those postures. And
Yeah,
but
and
you're
and
saying that it's not that getting into the postures isn't all there is to it.
oh, absolutely not. But I will say this is that that quality of physical flexibility carries over and gets deeper and deeper into who we are. So that when we become physically flexible, something changes about us energetically. And it's not just a physical release of tension, because
Right.
it's true that if people are really, one of the best things you can do for yourself if you are um, bothered, if you're feeling weighted by something that's happened, or if you're tense or worried or anxious, hey, a great thing to do is to go out and take a walk, and you'll feel better afterwards.
Right. Exactly.
Just because you've changed your environment a little bit, but it's not going to ultimately change the inner challenge that we face, which is really where yoga begins. Um, there's two basic resources for yoga. Most people have heard of them. Maybe I'm biased. Most people in my world have
Uh-huh.
heard of them.
Right.
Um, one is the Bhagavad Gita,
Yes.
and the Bhagavad Gita is sometimes called, and it's a misnomer, but it's sometimes called the Hindu Bible. And it's not really fair to put it that way because it's not talking about any religion. The Bhagavad Gita is not talking about or not teaching or it's not anything to do with any particular religion except what is called the eternal religion. There's a Sanskrit word for it, and I'll try to avoid using a whole lot of Sanskrit words because they don't translate perfectly into English.
I
But
love Sanskrit words because people can't correct my pronunciation.
well, my name is a great beginning point.
Yes.
Uh, but the term is Sanatan Dharma, and it means the best English translation is the eternal religion. Eternal religion meaning that if you were to take any of the fixed, obvious religions in the world today,
Hmm.
the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, if you were to take the non-Abrahamic religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, all those, if you were to take away the titles, the names of those religions, and find out what are the basic principles, you would be able to take a thread and you could sew your way through every one of those religions. And if you were to take those core teachings without the names of the religions and you wanted to give it all a title, it would be yoga. That's yoga. And
That's
so,
that's very, very, very interesting to me. And I will say that I read the Gita and I thought I didn't understand it well enough. So I took a course from the Hindu University of America, which is online, and I learned so much from that. And what I was experiencing was, yeah, I read that in this other thing. Oh, yeah, that was, and I would ask the instructor, is that like this? And he would say, oh, yes. So there was so much commonality that I was thinking I was going to learn something exotic or, somehow wildly different from my previous experience. And what it did was shift my perspective, but it did not there was so much that was like love thy neighbor like thyself kind of thinking.
yes,
And, you know uh, be of service to others rather than yourself kind of thinking that I experienced in Catholicism, and I have experienced talking with people of various faiths, and I've always been surprised at how much we agree on some very core principles.
yep. One of the things that I have found is very curious is that I have many friends who are yogis, part of this path of yoga.
Yes.
And as the particular yoga organization I'm a part of is called Ananda.
Right.
Ananda itself is a Sanskrit word, and it refers to the inner presence and experience of joy with a capital J
Mm.
that does not have any reference or is not dependent upon any external reference. It is simply part of our nature. So Ananda is that yoga organization that I am part of. And,
I got
you
to
know,
stop you there.
go
I'm
ahead.
not sure I followed you. All right, so you're talking about joy. It's not based on an experience of something that makes you feel a certain way. You're talking about it coming from inside, or is that what I heard you say? Or
Yes. Let me sort of back up a little bit and put things into context. This is a big conversation. We're not going to cover everything within a matter of 20 or 30 minutes. But it helps to have a framework. And, all of the Bhagavad Gita will fit into this framework. There's another reference,
oh yes,
that
too.
The Bhagavad Gita is pretty much, it's all about inspiration and devotion and spiritual practice.
Right.
There's another book called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And that book is much more like it's much more like a manual. It tells you, here's the situation we're in. And if you understand the practice of yoga, you don't need to go any further. So it comes out in about 195 or 196 short teachings. The first 3 are really the essence of it. And the first one lays the groundwork. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit right now, because it goes to that question that or everything that we've been talking about so far. And that is that all of us have the sense of dissatisfaction with the way that the world works.
Yes.
You know,
Well,
people don't behave the way that we want.
right.
We don't get what we think we should. We've been working so hard, and yet somehow we haven't gotten the reward that we were expecting.
Or just that there's so much injustice. And
Exactly. You can look at all of the disconnections that there are in the world, and the greatest disconnection that one individual soul will end up feeling is that connection, the desire to find our, I'm trying to find good words for it because I'm trying to use something other than the word God. But we have the sense of being separate from something, like we've left home, and how do we find home again?
how
You
about
know,
divine?
there is, yes, and so we feel that we want to go home and be with our divine parents, our divine mother or father. We want to go there, but we feel that we're not there yet. And this is,
Yeah. You're just I'm picking up. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's like,
go ahead.
I read from something, and Ram Dass once said, "We're all just walking each other home."
And it is a beautiful, beautiful teaching.
And that you just reminded me of that.
Well, I love Ram Dass's story in part because, of course, he became most famous originally for things having to do with psychedelics.
Right.
And he then found his way to a deeper truth than what he was able to experience with the psychedelics. But the sense of separation is a driving force. We also have the sense of a goal, someplace that we want to go. And that is that we want to find this divine union, this connection that doesn't depend upon other people following through on what they say they'll do, doesn't depend upon the world providing us just the right things that we want. And between these two things, the sense of separation, the sense of this desire for union. Your introduction was perfect, by the way.
Thank you.
Talking about union, about reunion. And yoga is simply the way that we get from a sense of separation to a sense of connection. And the primary yoga practice, it can be yoga postures, but it's mostly meditation. That's most of it right there.
I'm already starting to change my mind, Yudhishthira, and because the book behind me is Freedom, Your Path to Recovery. What you just said is like the heart of the message that I'm trying to say, was that when I was in my addiction, I was disconnected. And when I recovered, when part of my recovery was finding a community, finding people that were walking their own paths, but I could walk with them. And the fact that I felt connected to them. And this connection was life-changing for me, because I thought by isolating, I would keep people away and people were the problem. And I was deluded in my thinking, because it turned out that people were part of the solution. And I didn't have to change them. I had to change me.
Yep.
And that was it's the genesis of the show, Change Your Mind. I realized that, hey, they weren't the problem, I was. My attitude towards them could change, and I could be far more accepting than I had been, less judgmental than I had been, and more welcoming to others' differences of opinions, rather than always correcting people.
Yep. Jim, I've been there. Yeah. I know that kind of behavior because I did it all the time.
Mm,
It's one of the things that I found with so many of my friends who were raised Catholic or raised in Judaism or raised as Hindus. And when they become yogis, one of the things that I've heard repeated over and over again is that this path of yoga has made me a better Catholic. This path of yoga has made me a better Jew. This path of yoga has made me a better Hindu or Sikh, or you fill in the blank.
right.
It's interesting that for years I taught at a recovery center in Scotts Valley, California.
Uh-huh.
I taught yoga there. But when I teach yoga, I'm teaching yoga postures, but I'm also teaching yoga postures in a way that where the posture becomes a meditation. So it's not about physical flexibility so much as it is about being present and aware. And the teachings of yoga come out in every single religion. And, let me give you an example. All right. There are certain quotes of Jesus that appear in the Bible that are oftentimes, excuse me, very much misunderstood. Jesus said quite clearly, "Be still and know that I am God." That "be still" part is really very much the first practice of yoga. When you mention yoga postures, the Sanskrit word for those are asana.
Ah,
And the main value of asana is to be able to hold the body still. And another simple teaching that Jesus taught was like, he said, the kingdom of God is within you.
yes.
He was not speaking in metaphors there.
Right.
He was speaking quite literally. And when I mentioned the word ananda, that joy that is within us, it already abides there. We don't have to find it someplace else.
Right. That's
And
yes.
one last Jesus quote I'll give you. It's from Matthew. He says, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light."
Say it
And
again, please.
if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. And in yoga, one of the things we do is that we lift our gaze up to the point between the eyebrows, just
Right.
above the bridge of the nose.
Right.
And if you learn to relax and hold your attention there, and this is a challenge, by the way, none of this is easy.
Right.
Because all you have to do is try to hold your mind steady for what, 10 seconds?
Yeah. It's a
15,
challenge.
30 seconds? You begin to realize there's a challenge going on here.
Yes.
But when you do relax and hold your gaze there for long enough, and especially if you have your heart connected to the process, this is the thing, is that yoga is not a practice of the mind. It's not all, it's not all mental. That the heart is involved in everything that we do. And it's an important part of it because one of the things that happens in the heart for many people is that their emotions take over and their emotions become the problems.
Yes.
Whereas in yoga, what we do is we take that emotional energy and lift it up. And we bring it up to this point between the eyebrows. When we do that, we have devotion, not just a mental activity. And that combination is sort of like a chemical reaction. You are well educated enough to know what a catalytic reaction is in chemistry.
Sure.
And it's almost like magic.
Right.
That you take these two things, put them together, nothing happens. But you add this one other drop of one other substance, and suddenly colors change or precipitates drop out or these sorts of things.
And the sum is greater than the parts. Yes.
And when you add devotion, it's that catalyst that changes everything. And so we will sometimes, it's very predictable, we'll see a single eye here, which is called the spiritual eye.
Right. Okay.
And you might have even heard of that before.
I have, yes. And is this also in India? They also have, uh, I guess, painted on dots, or is
They
that
have what's called they have bindis, which are sometimes little jewels. They do. They have that, which is just a reminder.
right?
And think about the way it works is that you're seeing someone else, and if they have a spot right there, or if they've been blessed, or they put a bindi on right there, what does it do to you? It means that when I see that person, I'm going to immediately put a little bit of my energy right there.
Wow.
Now it works, by the way, it works at all levels because of the fact that it so happens that there's a particular gland here in the physical body. There's a particular part of the brain there in the physical body,
All right.
they separate us from all the other creatures on the planet.
Really?
That
That's
that
that
that that,
sounds like science to me.
that well, as you know, I've been a science teacher for years as well as a yoga teacher. And so you get this very
Holy smokes! So no other animals can get that energy the way that they do by not forcing, but opening. You just to look at that spot, and a
well,
little
I
bit
hope
of your energy goes into there.
yeah, I don't, I don't discount the potential for certain other animals
Yeah.
to have a high level of intelligence. I think it's
Yes,
obvious that they do,
I do too.
but one of the things I do know from my own experience is that I am capable of putting my attention here, and I am capable of holding my attention there because I've been practicing this for decades
Right.
now,
Right.
and I've gotten a little bit better.
Well, practice helps. That's how you
Yeah.
get to Carnegie Hall.
Well, and so these teachings of yoga really revolve much more around how do I get from a sense of being apart from my divine source and reconnect permanently with that divine source. And all of yoga is the how to do that.
That's amazing to me. And we're running out of time, but I'm going to have to
Okay.
maybe invite you back if you're willing to, because I think we're just scratching the surface of something that's fascinating to me. I'm going to ask you one more question about my
Sure.
my practice and how it might relate. I've because of the some physical sports injuries I've had in the past, I have to prop my back against the wall when I do squats, and sometimes I can feel like a quad muscle starting to cramp, or and what I'm able to do is focus my attention on the other quad, and all of a sudden I can feel like there's a balance again, and the one that was giving me trouble, it's not giving me trouble anymore. So I'm shifting my attention, and it seems like there's something energetically or physically that's happening then. And it's just my mind doing it, changing my body or something like that. If you could put it in yoga terms for me.
Well, I can. I will also offer you another suggestion just in terms of that particular problem. And the suggestion I'll offer is a very physical one. That is, if you will stretch your hamstrings first, you'll find the quads will be more receptive.
I've
uh,
been told that before.
but that's just because of a built-in reality about our physical body, which is called um, um, something something inhibition. Anyway, it involves the opposing muscles.
Yeah.
Engage them first, stretch them first,
Yeah.
and then their opposites will tend to relax.
We're all connected.
Yes, but you've also you actually have pointed us in the direction of something that's much deeper, which is that the physical body is subject to the physical mind. Those two things are part of the one reality about us.
Yes.
It's in yoga terms, Jim, it is the least permanent part of who we are. But it's also where we find ourselves every morning when we wake up. When your back is to the wall and you're doing those squats, you're working with your physical body.
Right.
But the energy that runs through the body, that is the next level. And when we use our mind to focus our attention, as you were just describing, what happens is it changes the flow of energy. This is, again, I realize we're running out of time.
Yeah.
But this is sort of just the beginning, because you can look at science again and realize that in the 19 teens and 20s, you had all these scientists realizing that a human consciousness had to be present for certain things to take place. Well, you just gave an example of it that's much more practical than some double slit experiment in in physics. And that is that if I put my attention with willpower to do something else, that part that I have been bothered by is going to be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there the last question, is there a Sanskrit word for this energy you're talking about?
Well, this energy itself is called prana.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And
I
when we
couldn't remember, but I knew that there was a word that I had heard that meant basically energy.
And when we learn to work with and control that energy, even a little bit, we call it pranayama. Yama meaning control, prana meaning that. And just to call it energy is not quite enough.
I get it. Okay.
It is life. It is life force. It is the energy that's animating our bodies right now.
All right. Well, I could go on, but I'm going to take you backstage now because I have run out of time. I'm actually going overtime. But I want to thank you so much for joining us today and just beginning the discussion of how I can change my mind about yoga. Thanks again.
All right. Beautiful.
All right. Well, I've got a lot to think about, but you mentioned Matthew and talking about some of Jesus' sayings, and I think it was Matthew that said, "A house divided cannot stand." And when we think about being united again, this is what we're talking about. If we're a divided country, if we're divided states, if we're divided communities, it cannot stand. So we must do better. We must be able to change our minds, become more accepting, more tolerant of other people's viewpoints, of other people in general. I'm learning this the hard way. It wasn't easy for me to do, but I did it. You can do it. And I want you to think about how you can change your mind. Thank you for watching this week's episode of Change Your Mind. And the Roman god Janus in my lower left-hand corner is going to be replaced by a more modern version because we can change our minds. And just remember, every weekend is a new beginning.